Mom, it's time for you to move into a nursing home. A place like that suits someone like you better. The words fell across the dinner table, light as breath, yet cold enough to freeze my heart. The one who said them, my daughter-in-law. The one who stayed silent, my own son. I once believed that love alone was enough to keep a family together. But that night, the locks were changed, the bank account disappeared, and I became a stranger in the very house I had built with my life. One rainy night, the lights went out. I fell down the stairs. When I woke up, I understood. Someone wanted me gone. Forever. But I didn't die. I only stayed silent and remembered. Every word, every glance, every trace of proof, I gathered them all like shards of broken glass, until one day, in the middle of a lavish party, that same voice rose above the crowd. I just need her signature, and it's done. The whole room went still, and I, the mother who had been betrayed, stood up, not with hatred, but with the truth. If something in this story speaks to you, stay and listen till the end, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the stories yet to come. Small, sorrowful things, but still filled with hope, just like life itself. Late afternoon light spilled through the window, laying a thin golden veil across the oak table. I adjusted the tablecloth, set one more fork and knife to make 3, then stepped back. The house on the hill was so quiet I could hear the wind slip through the cracks in the door, carrying the scent of damp pine and a trace of wood smoke from the neighbor's chimney. I used to love evenings like this, when dinner was a place where 3 people talked about the day that had passed. But since Claire was gone, it was only Mark and Sabrina, and our conversations had grown shorter, like breaths held halfway. I straightened the candle at the center of the table. Its flame trembled, casting light across the glass frame that held Claire's photo. Every time the glow touched her face, I felt the urge to say something, and then didn't. The door opened. The sharp click of Sabrina's heels crossed the wooden floor. She walked in holding a thick stack of papers wrapped in dark red leather. "Dinner smells good," she said, calm and even. I smiled faintly, poured her a glass of water, though my hand shook a little. Mark came in behind her, took off his coat, hung it by the door. He didn't speak, just glanced at the table, then sat in his usual seat across from me, eyes lowered. I took my place and waited for them to begin. Sabrina lifted a piece of chicken, chewed slowly. No one spoke, only the faint clink of cutlery and the pendulum clock in the corner, counting out each heavy second. She set down her fork, dabbed her lips with a napkin. "Mother," she began, softly but firmly, "you should move into a nursing home." The words dropped like a stone on still water. I looked at her, thinking I'd misheard, but she was still smiling, that polite, professional smile people wear in meeting rooms. "There will be professionals there to look after you," she continued. "You won't have to worry about your medication or falling down the stairs again." Mark lifted his head for a moment, then looked back down at his plate. I set my glass down. The sound of it touching the table was dry and final. "Why?" I asked quietly, mostly to myself. "This is my home." Sabrina folded her hands together, tilting her head just slightly. "I'm only thinking of your health and your safety," she said gently. "This house is too big, too many stairs. If something ever happened—" She paused, choosing her words with care. "No one would be there in time to help." I heard every word, but felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Only the sudden chill of the wind outside pressing against the walls. The candle wavered. The flame leaned, its light breathing with mine. Mark stayed silent, eyes fixed somewhere beyond my shoulder, cutting into his potatoes as if they might disappear if he stopped. I looked at my son and remembered the dinners long ago, when he was small, and all it took was a soft, "Eat, dear," for him to smile and bow his head in thanks. Now, in the house I had built with my own hands, he sat before me like a stranger, and I realized, sometimes silence is the answer. The candle flickered out. The scent of wax drifted over the table. I reached for my chopsticks, tried to lift a piece of vegetable, but my hand slipped. A small click echoed as the wood hit the tabletop, tiny, yet sharp enough to freeze the air around us. No one spoke again. Only the clock remained, tick, 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 marking time in a house that no longer seemed to belong to me. I kept my eyes on the table, hollow inside. The roasted chicken had gone cold. Grease had congealed into a thin film like candle wax. I sat still, feeling the slow, heavy rhythm of my heart, each beat striking the walls like a muted hammer. Why? This is my home. The question slipped out, not to argue, but to test whether I still had the right to ask at all. Sabrina leaned on her reason, for your health, for your safety. She tilted her head, her voice softening. Mother, we just want what's best for you. At Evergreen, there'll be someone to help you bathe, take your medicine, someone to talk to. This house is too dangerous now, can't you see? The stairs, the windows, the cold. Enough! My voice cut through hers, hoarse, unfamiliar. Mark shifted slightly in his chair, but said nothing. I looked into my son's eyes, hoping to find even a flicker of warmth reflected in the candlelight, but all I saw was a wall of silence. Silence, and the kind of passive agreement that kills a mother slowly, piece by piece. I took a deep breath. Where are you taking me? Evergreen Senior Home, Sabrina replied without looking up. It's a wonderful place. There's a small lake, private rooms, attentive staff. You'll get used to it. You think I need to get used to leaving my own home? She paused, pressing her lips together. It's not like that, Mom. That mom sounded rehearsed, gentle, yet empty, as if spoken by someone playing a part. I placed my trembling hand on the table. Light slipped through my thin fingers, tracing the fine blue veins beneath the skin. As long as I still stood in this kitchen, I was the one who kept its fire alive. But in that moment, I realized I was sitting between two young people, and the only warmth left in the room came from a candle nearly burned to its end. The air was cold enough to sting. The room was small, yet the space between the three of us felt wide enough for the wind to pass through. Mark lifted his glass, avoiding my eyes. Sabrina straightened the stack of documents, each sheet whispering against the next, sharp, like paper cutting through air. I lowered my gaze, trying to steady my chopsticks, but they slipped from my grasp and fell to the tiled floor. A dry, brittle sound, barely audible, yet I knew. Something had broken in this house at that exact moment. The candle flickered out, a thin wisp of smoke curling upward. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees. In the stillness of the kitchen, only the clock remained. Tick, tick. And deep within me, the quiet certainty that a tragedy had just begun. The morning after that silent dinner, I stepped onto the porch and found the lock had been changed. My old key no longer fit. From then on, Sabrina began to take control, quietly, methodically. It started with small things, the locks, the keys. Then my bank card merged into a shared account for easier bill payments. She said it with a gentle smile, the kind one uses when teaching someone how to live more efficiently. From now on, I'll help you manage your medication, so you don't mix up the doses. Remember you forgot the morning pills the other day? She opened the cabinet and arranged each bottle in neat order, her voice soft, steady, precise, like the ticking of the kitchen clock. I felt like a guest in the very house I had built. Every familiar corner now carried her mark. The scent of a new detergent, the plants moved to different spots, the painting Claire once made replaced by a cold, abstract print. Even the sounds had changed. No more soft, classical music in the mornings, only the tapping of Sabrina's keyboard in her office, and Mark's voice on the phone discussing his projects. I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window. The sky was gray, the air sharp with cold, though snow hadn't yet fallen. The chill pressed through the glass, like the slow peeling away of memory. Sabrina came over and set a cup of tea before me. "Drink it while it's hot, Mom." I nodded, taking the cup. "Thank you." "Of course. I just want things to be a little more organized, you know?" I gave a faint smile. Order is the most frightening thing when love is gone. She didn't answer, just lifted her shoulders and walked away. When her door closed, I heard the faint turn of the lock from the inside. A small sound, yet I knew. Another part of this house no longer belonged to me. That evening, Mark came home late. He kissed his wife on the cheek and sat down at the table. "You've been organizing Mom's pills?" Sabrina smiled. "Yes, and I've set up automatic transfers for her expenses too, so she won't have to deal with the bank anymore." He nodded, asked no questions, then turned to me, speaking softly, almost kindly. "Good idea, Mom. Sabrina just wants to make sure you're okay." I looked at my son. There were words forming somewhere inside me, but they caught in my throat. Mark believed she was taking care of me. He truly believed it, so deeply he couldn't see the boundaries being quietly dismantled, brick by brick. I said only, "Do I look okay to you, son?" He chuckled awkwardly. "Of course. Just don't overthink it." "No," I whispered. "I'm just trying to remember whose house this is." He looked at me then, either not understanding or unwilling to. Outside, the wind scraped across the roof, dragging dry leaves against the wooden boards. In a house once full of laughter, the only sound now was the dishwasher, steady, sterile, cold. I sat there, my fingers tracing the tabletop, the faint stain where my husband's coffee cup used to rest. And for the first time, I wondered, is it possible to lose a home while still living inside it? By the fourth morning since Sabrina had reorganized everything, I went to my bedroom desk to retrieve my savings ledger, the one where I'd written every small interest earned. But it was gone. So was the envelope with my financial papers, bank records, house deed, the handwritten will I'd kept for decades. I stood there for a long time, my heart racing, but my mind strangely blank. Every drawer had been emptied, tidied to a perfection that erased every trace of me. I opened the closet, searched each shelf, then stopped in front of the mirror. The woman staring back looked bewildered, yet unmistakably aware, the look of someone who had just realized she was being slowly erased from her own life. I walked downstairs, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "Sabrina, have you seen the folders that were in my desk drawer?" She looked up from her laptop, still in the ivory blouse she called her work-from-home uniform. "What folders?" "My bank documents and my savings book." She smiled lightly and took a sip of coffee. "You're mistaken, Mom. I cleared out that pile of old papers last week. They were just copies, nothing important." I said nothing, just looked at her. For a brief second, her smile faltered, revealing something sharper behind her eyes. You think I don't know where I keep my own papers? Mom, she said slowly, her tone dipped in pity. Sometimes you forget things. It happens. I drew a steady breath. You shouldn't throw away anything that belongs to me without asking. She shrugged. I was just tidying up. Relax. Then she turned back to her screen, ending the conversation with a cold click of the mouse. I stood there for a while longer, listening to the rhythm of her typing, steady, confident, indifferent. Mark came out of the bathroom, towel around his neck. Everything okay? No, son, I'm missing some papers. Sabrina spoke faster than I did. I told you, just some copies. She forgot. He looked between us, exhaled. Mom, maybe check again later, okay? No need to argue first thing in the morning. Just one sentence, but enough. It told me everything. He believed her completely. I turned away, hiding the tremor in my hands. The kitchen was flooded with sunlight, yet it felt metallic, sterile. Every object sat perfectly in place, too perfect to feel real. After Sabrina and Mark left for work, I opened the kitchen cabinet and searched for the old tin box that once held family photos. I remembered hiding a USB key inside, a backup of my most important documents. The box was still there, empty. I sat down, and what rose inside of me wasn't fear anymore. It was awareness, like an old animal in the forest, sensing the predator drawing near, and knowing that silence is the only way to survive. Morning light filtered through the window, falling across the dining table, illuminating every scratch, every mark of memory still clinging to the wood. In that light, my gaze hardened, from suspicion into vigilance. I poured myself a cup of tea. Steam clouded the window pane. Through the fogged glass, I saw Sabrina's reflection. She'd come back to grab something she'd forgotten. She didn't see me watching, but I knew. From this moment on, the game had truly begun. That night, the house sank back into silence. Rain whispered against the porch roof, mingling with the faint tapping of keys from the living room, the rhythm that had come to define this place. Mark was under Sabrina's spell. I knew it, not from what he said, but from the way he no longer spoke at all. I overheard them arguing. Sabrina's voice was low but sharp, like a thin blade slicing through air. If your mother keeps interfering, our marriage will fall apart. I can't stand the way she looks at me, like I've stolen something from her. Don't exaggerate, Mark muttered. Exaggerate? She laughed softly. Do you even know what it's like to live with someone who never trusts you? It's exhausting, Mark. I need you to choose a side. Then came silence. A silence so long I thought he'd walked away, but he hadn't. Only the quiet sound of a door closing, soft, deliberate, like a full stop at the end of something between us. After that night, he began to avoid me. Work, meetings, deadlines, or simply tired, he'd say. Dinner after dinner, his seat stayed empty. The only thing left was his glass of water, still placed beside my plate, a habit no one had yet remembered to erase. I ate alone, listening to the slow tick of the clock, trying to believe this was only temporary. One evening, I carried a bowl of chicken soup to his office, his favorite since childhood. The light was still on. The door stood slightly ajar. I knocked gently. You should eat something before it gets cold. Inside, I heard Sabrina's voice, soft but sharp enough to pierce through the crack. See? She just doesn't know when to stop. I froze. Mark opened the door, his expression uneasy. Mom, it's late. I'm in the middle of something. It's just a bowl of soup, son. Can't you spare 5 minutes? He sighed, the sound faint as a breath. Please, go to bed. I stood there for a few seconds, the steam from the soup fading between us. Good night, Mark. Good night, Mom. The door closed. After that, every attempt to speak with him alone was deflected, redirected, or quietly shut down. The next morning I waited in the kitchen. He came downstairs looking tired, tie undone, eyes glued to his phone. Mark, I called. Do you remember what your father used to say? That no outsider can ever come between blood? He looked up and gave a weary half-smile. Mom, please, this isn't about taking sides. Isn't it? No, things are just different now. Different, I said quietly. Or changed. He didn't answer. His gaze slipped away. At breakfast, the sound of plates meeting the table was cold, disconnected. Sabrina entered, placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm heading out. Don't be late, she said. Then she turned to me, offering a thin smile. Remember to take your pills on time, Mom. I nodded, saying nothing. The door shut behind them. The car engine started, a pale stream of exhaust trailing into the morning air. I sat down, looking at the empty chair across from me, and in my mind her voice echoed from the night before. I need you to choose a side. And Mark had chosen. The days that followed, Sabrina's words dripped into my son's heart like slow poison. Not through shouting or commands, but through that chilling kind of gentleness, the voice that makes you feel guilty for things you never did. Whenever I tried to speak, she would cut in softly, with that weary tone she'd mastered. Mark, I just want peace. If your mother doesn't trust me, how can I live here? And he would look at me, eyes pleading for calm, as if the blame somehow belonged to both of us. So I stayed silent, because by now I understood. Every word I said only made him believe her more. One evening, I overheard them in the living room. Her voice, low, almost a whisper. Do you know how your mother looks at me? Like she's just waiting for me to die so she can have the house back. Don't say that, he murmured. Then tell me it's not true. Mark said nothing. A chair scraped softly, then silence. I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, my hand brushing the wooden railing. The chill from it ran through my fingers all the way up my spine. She knew exactly how to make him believe I was the problem. An old, stubborn mother who wouldn't leave, wouldn't let go. And Mark, my son who once promised, Mom, I'll take care of you no matter what, could no longer see how he was being led, one quiet step at a time. That night I opened an old notebook and sat at the small table under the dim yellow light. The pages had yellowed with age, but the pen still moved smoothly. I wrote, My son is blind, but not his eyes. The worst kind of blindness is seeing everything except the truth. I paused. Rain began to fall outside, tapping against the tin roof in slow, even rhythm, like the steady breathing of the house itself. Listening closely, it sounded like the whisper of a sadness long familiar. On the wall, Claire's photograph still hung there. The lamp's reflection touched her face, calm, gentle, unchanging. I murmured softly, If you were still here, maybe I wouldn't have to learn how to be this silent. Outside my door, I heard Mark's footsteps. He stopped for a moment just beyond the threshold, then moved on. His steps were slow, heavy, the steps of a man carrying something he couldn't face. Maybe, for a brief second, he wanted to knock, but he didn't. Loneliness seeped through the walls, not the loneliness of someone living alone, but of someone surrounded by family, yet cut off from their warmth. The house held every sound of life: the washing machine, the ring of a phone, the click of the refrigerator door, and yet not a single word that meant anything. I set the table as I always did, 3 plates, then cleared away 2. The candle burned lower than the night before. For a moment, I felt as though I were living in someone else's house, borrowing old memories just to survive. Night fell. I drew the curtains closed and caught my reflection in the glass. A woman with wide-open eyes, but no one left in them to see. That afternoon, a chill wind drifted in from the pines, slipping through the open window and scattering the stack of papers on the dining table. As I gathered them, a thin folder caught my eye, tucked between the electricity bills. Its cover read, Evergreen Bank, Home Equity Loan Application. I frowned. It was a loan application, under Sabrina's name. Curious, I opened it. Inside were pages of figures and terms, but I understood enough to know this wasn't an ordinary personal loan. On the last page, the section marked Co-Signer Authorization listed 2 names: Sabrina Moore, Helen Moore. I froze. My name, and beneath it, my signature. The H tilted slightly to the right, the tail of the N faintly trembling. It looked exactly like mine, but it wasn't. A cold rush climbed my spine. I sank into the chair and read every page. Each one carried that same forged signature. Identical spacing, identical slant, too perfect to be real. I hadn't signed a single bank document in over 2 years. The last thing I'd touched was a pension check. Now I sat still, my fingers clenched white against the table. The world around me seemed to shrink, leaving only the ticking of the clock and the whisper of wind outside. For so long, I'd thought the most terrifying thing in this house was silence. But now I knew. Worse than silence is when someone uses your own name to erase your life. The door opened. Sabrina walked in, grocery bags in hand. "Oh, you found those," she said lightly, as if I'd stumbled on an old magazine. I kept my tone steady. "What is this?" She set the bags down, tugged her hair free from her coat, her calmness so precise it chilled me. "Just some paperwork. Temporary. The bank's reviewing our credit line." "Our credit line?" "For the house," she said smoothly. "Everything's under control." "And this signature?" I held up the page. She glanced at it, smiled faintly. "Oh, you're confused. I asked you to sign those last week, remember?" I stared at her. She didn't flinch. Her gaze was soft, but icy, the look of someone who'd already rehearsed this moment. "No," I said quietly. "I never signed them." "Maybe not in your head," she murmured, "but it's done." My breath caught, not from fear but from realization. Someone was forging my name here in my own house. Mark appeared at the top of the stairs, laptop in hand. "What's going on?" Sabrina turned instantly, her voice melting into sweetness. "Nothing serious. Mom just got mixed up with some papers." He nodded, believing her, as always. I didn't speak. I simply placed the file back on the table. She gathered it up swiftly, slid it into her bag, still smiling. "Don't worry, Mom. It's all to keep you safe." The door closed gently behind her. I watched her go, feeling the cold settle deep into my bones. On the table, the small candle had just gone out. A single thread of smoke rose toward the ceiling, slow, deliberate, like a warning that nothing would ever be quiet again. Sabrina's voice echoed faintly in my mind. Just temporary paperwork, don't worry. She said it like soothing a child after a nightmare, soft, drawn out, almost a lullaby. I just want to tidy up a few accounts so the bank can process things faster. You know how complicated paperwork gets around here. I looked at her then, her eyes clear, steady, unblinking as she lied. And you needed my signature for that? She smiled without looking up. I'd never do anything without thinking of you first, Mom. The words dripped with honey, and underneath the sweetness, I tasted steel. She packed the paperwork away, careful and deliberate. I stayed where I was, saying nothing. Her heels clicked across the wooden floor as she left, the measured step of someone who believes she's just won another move. The room sank back into quiet. Late light pooled on the table, throwing a thin, muted gold over the remaining pages. I studied the blank spaces not yet signed, the small printed numbers, the words collateral property blurring where steam fogged my tea. Somewhere along the way, the warmth in my chest stopped being fear. It changed into something else, calm and cold, bright as steel. I took my phone and opened the camera. No trembling, no hesitation. I quietly photographed every document, page after page, every word, every signature. The camera clicked, small and definite, like sealing a secret. When I finished, I moved the photos into a hidden folder and protected it with a password. I didn't yet know what I would do next, only that the evidence had to exist somewhere outside my memory. I leaned back in the chair and listened to the house breathe. It had once been full of life, the murmur of dinner, the piano, Mark's laughter in the kitchen. Now it was the slow, mechanical spin of the ceiling fan, deliberate and stiff, like the heartbeat of someone who is slipping into resignation. I closed my eyes and let the wind through the eaves fill my ears, the smell of rain mixing with the scent of old paper. Beneath it all, a small, rebellious flame began to glow inside me. Not loud, not furious, just a steady light in a place even fear couldn't reach. For the first time in years, I did not feel like the elderly woman being pushed to the margins. I felt awake, aware of the game being played, and the fact that they thought I couldn't see. I stood and went to my room, opening the drawer of my dressing table. Among the old things there was a faded silver business card. Victor Hale, an old friend of my husband's, a retired judge. I laid my hand on it. The lamp threw a thin stripe of light across my wrinkled fingers. Outside, the rain began properly, each drop striking the window like the steady count of a newly awakened resolve. I drew the curtains closed carefully, as if shielding that small, private flame. That night I wrote in my journal, "People can forge a signature, feign affection, but they cannot fake the look of someone prepared to resist." And I knew, in that moment, I would no longer be only the deceived. I would be the one waiting for her turn to strike. That night, the rain came earlier than usual. Cold winds swept down from the pines, whistling across the roof like distant voices calling through the dark. I sat in the living room, a single lamp burning low, its yellow light trembling over a cup of tea gone cold. It was past 10. Mark still wasn't home. Only the rain and the wind kept each other company inside this house. I decided to go upstairs. When I reached the staircase, the hallway light flickered once, then died. The house sank into a dense, breathing blackness. "Strange," I murmured, running my hand along the wall for the switch. Nothing. Only the steady roar of rain beating against the roof, echoing inside my chest. I placed one foot on the first step. The wood creaked beneath my weight. A flash of lightning flared through the window, enough to reveal a thin trail of water glistening down the handrail. Someone had left the upstairs window open, I thought, and I kept climbing. The second step, the third, the fourth, then a crash. My foot slipped. A violent, weightless drop, cold and blindingly fast. The world turned over itself. The sound of my own body hitting the wooden steps, then the floor. A brief burst of white, then darkness. In that instant, before I lost consciousness, I saw a figure at the top of the stairs. Slim, still. Its face pale in the flicker of lightning. It might have been a hallucination, but the breath I felt near my ear, that was real. When I woke, the rain had been replaced by screaming. "Mom! Oh my God! Mark! Call 911!" Sabrina's voice filled the house, frantic, cracking with panic, perfectly pitched with concern. I tried to open my eyes. The lids felt heavy as stone. Everything blurred except the glow of her phone as she dialed. She knelt beside me, her hand trembling against my shoulder. "Hold on, Mom. Just hold on, okay?" Her voice broke at the edges, beautifully, almost theatrically. Even angels, I thought, might envy how well she performed worry. I tried to speak, but my lips were dry. Warm blood pooled at my temple. Through the haze, I saw Mark appear, face pale with shock.
"What happened?"
"I don't know," Sabrina sobbed. "I was in the kitchen and heard a crash. God, I told her that staircase was dangerous." She clutched my hand, tears falling onto my skin like proof of her devotion. Mark knelt beside me, eyes wide, terrified.
"Mom, can you hear me?"
I wanted to say yes, but only a breath escaped me. Somewhere beyond the storm, sirens began the wail, long, distant, slicing through the rain. Sabrina leaned close, whispering, "Everything will be fine. You'll be safe soon." Her words sounded tender, yet to me they were colder than steel. I closed my eyes, my breath breaking apart. Suddenly, the ceiling light blinked back to life, flooding the room with white. And in the split second before consciousness slipped away, I saw it, the light switch, on the wall just below the stairs, within reach of the person still standing there. Then everything went black. Mark's voice came through the dark, frantic, raw.
"Be careful, she hit her head!"
His panic was real, but the guilt inside it belonged to the wrong person. Sabrina stayed close as the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher, her hands gripping mine, face streaked with rain and tears. She played the perfect daughter-in-law. Not hysterical, not detached, just heartbreakingly composed. "I told you," she whispered. "That staircase was dangerous. She needs care." Mark squeezed her shoulder.
"I know. I should have listened."
I heard every word, though my eyes wouldn't open. The ambulance doors closed. The rain faded into the hum of the engine. Inside, the air reeked of antiseptic, blood, and metal. Someone fitted an oxygen mask over my face, a voice somewhere talking about blood pressure and cranial trauma. I let myself drift, my body no longer mine. When I opened my eyes again, white ceiling tiles filled my vision. The monitor beeped softly beside me.
A young nurse adjusted the IV and smiled gently. "Mrs. Moore, can you hear me?" I nodded faintly, my voice a rasp. "Where am I?" "St. Mary's Hospital," she said kindly. "Your son brought you in last night. You're very lucky. No fractures, just a mild concussion." Her smile wavered with a trace of hesitation. Before I could ask, Sabrina appeared in the doorway, holding a bouquet of white lilies. "Mom," she breathed, stepping into the light. "Thank God you're awake." Mark followed behind her, unshaven, hollow-eyed. I looked at them both, searching my son's face for even a flicker of understanding. All I found was misplaced gratitude. "If it weren't for Sabrina," he said hoarsely, "you might not be here. She saved you, Mom." I turned toward her, nodded faintly. Thank you. She set the flowers on the table and began arranging my medication, her movements practiced, patient, as if she'd been rehearsing this role her entire life. We just want you to be safe, Mom. The doctor said you need a few weeks to rest. Mark's voice broke through the sterile quiet. That's why you'll be moving to Evergreen for a while, just until you're fully recovered. Evergreen. The word fell between us like a stone dropped into deep water. I turned toward the window. The rain hadn't stopped. Outside, streams of water slid down the glass, merging into a single blurred veil that erased the world beyond. Sabrina placed a hand on my shoulder. It's the best thing for you, Mom. Trust me. I looked at that hand, smooth, immaculate, not a single scratch. A hand that didn't tremble, even after a terrifying accident. And in that instant, something sharp and clear pierced through me. A realization, cold, absolute. This wasn't an accident. After they left, the room filled again with the quiet pulse of machines. I closed my eyes, replaying every sound. The staircase, the darkness, the click of the switch. There had been no one else there, no one except the figure at the top, the one standing where the light had gone out. My gaze hardened against the white ceiling. There was no one left to trust. Not Mark, not the soft, rehearsed concern of the woman he married. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, deliberate, like someone knocking at the door of awakening. The nurse returned, speaking gently. Would you like me to call your family? I shook my head. No, I just need a little quiet. When the door closed, I stared at the ceiling lights, fluorescent, sterile, glowing with an artificial calm. They hummed faintly, white and merciless, like masks that refused to blink. And I whispered to the silence, no one turns off the lights, except the one who wants me gone. My breath left me in a slow exhale. The smell of antiseptic grew sweeter somehow, as though trying to hide something. Something only I could recognize. I closed my eyes. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, endless. But inside me, a different storm was gathering. 3 days after leaving the hospital, Mark drove me home. The rain had stopped, but the road up the hill was still slick, gravel crunching beneath the tires with a dry, uneven sound. Through the window, I watched the tall pines casting long shadows, silent sentinels bowing their heads to something already lost. When we reached the gate, I noticed it immediately. The lock had been changed. The new metal gleamed against the old wooden door, bright and foreign, a quiet declaration that I was no longer welcome here. Out of habit, I took out my old keys, but the metal refused to fit. What's this? I asked. Mark stepped out of the car, uneasy. I thought Sabrina told you. The door got jammed, so we had it replaced. It worked perfectly before I fell. He looked away. Just a precaution. The door opened. Sabrina stood there, smiling. We only did it temporarily, Mom. Don't worry. I was afraid someone might try to break in, so we wanted to be safe. Her tone was soft, every syllable measured, gentle enough to sound kind, controlled enough to remind me who now decided what was safe. I stepped inside. The air smelled different, lemongrass oil, faint and artificial, covering the scent of tea and old pine that used to belong to this house. A few things were out of place. Claire's photo no longer sat on the shelf. The knitted scarf I'd made was folded neatly away in a drawer. Even the sounds had changed, too still, too polished, as if the house had been scrubbed free of every memory it once held. Mark carried my suitcase to the living room, speaking in a tone that sounded rehearsed. Just rest, Mom. Don't worry about the paperwork. Sabrina's already helped me talk to the bank. Everything's under control. Paperwork? I asked, the chill crawling slowly up my spine. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a brown envelope. Inside was a set of documents printed on fresh, evergreen bank letterhead. Just a temporary transfer, he said quickly.
It's for the loan processing. Your account is still tied to the old paperwork, so they just need your signature to update ownership. It's only a formality to avoid legal complications. I took the papers. The pages were thick, the ink still fresh. Near the bottom, under owner authorization, the signature line was blank. In small print below it read, "Property to be held under joint management of Mark and Sabrina Moore." "Temporary?" I repeated. He nodded. "Yes, once you're better, we'll transfer it all back. The bank just needs my name on file for now." His voice trembled, but his eyes begged for trust. The same trust I had once given without hesitation. Sabrina stepped forward, resting a hand on his shoulder before turning to me. "I know this isn't what you want, Mom," she said softly, "but sometimes we have to be practical." Practical? The words scraped out of me like dry leaves. "They just need to know who's handling the finances," she continued. "You can't manage everything on your own anymore." Her smile was tender, perfectly so. "Everything will be easier this way, I promise." I looked at them, two young faces, bright, assured, full of conviction, and I realized I was standing inside a family portrait that no longer belonged to me. Outside, the clouds sank lower. The afternoon light dimmed, cold and sharp as steel. In the house I had built with a lifetime of savings, the people I loved most were now speaking to me in the language of strangers. I set the stack of papers down on the table. "All right," I said quietly, "but I'll read everything before I sign." Mark nodded quickly, almost relieved. "Of course, no rush." Sabrina turned away, hiding a small smile at the corner of her lips. I sat down. The late afternoon light slid across the table, catching the blank pages in the soft, pale gleam. The pen had already been placed there, its tip pointed toward me, as if someone had mapped out every step in advance. I picked up the first page and began to read. Line by line, the cold print unfolded. Portions of the house, the accounts, and the right to renovate, mortgage, or transfer temporarily. All of it contained neatly within that draft. My hand trembled slightly, the veins standing out pale against the skin. I looked at my son, the boy who used to follow me everywhere, his small hand gripping mine in the noise of a grocery store. Now he stood before me, eyes lowered to the floor, unable or unwilling to meet my gaze. My voice cracked as it left my throat. "You signed this?" The room went still. Only the pendulum clock spoke, counting each second like a verdict. Mark took a slow breath, set down his cup of coffee. "Mom, you need to rest." 4 words, small, final, like a sentence passed. I searched his face for hesitation, but found only the weary calm of a man who wanted peace more than truth. Beside him, Sabrina placed a hand on his back, the gentle, claiming touch of someone who knows she's already won. "Mark's right," she murmured. "You shouldn't stress anymore. Let us handle it." I nodded and smiled, a smile I didn't recognize as my own. No anger, no tears, just an emptiness wide enough to echo. And in that silence, I understood. Sometimes betrayal doesn't arrive with noise. It comes with a signature. Sabrina gathered the papers, slid them neatly into their leather folder with the care of someone storing a treasure. Then she turned to me, her tone perfectly composed. "Tomorrow, I'll take you to your physical therapy appointment. You need real rest now, no more worrying." She placed a hand on my shoulder, her fingers pressing lightly.
We'll take care of everything." I didn't move. Her hand was soft, warm, yet beneath that warmth was pressure, steady and deliberate. As they left the room, the rhythm of her heels on the wooden floor blended with the wind outside, each step sealing another nail into the coffin of the past. I rose and walked slowly around the room, the walls, the windows, the small scratches in the floorboards, each one a witness to the life I had lived here as mother, wife, keeper of a home. Everything remained, except the meaning of it all. I touched Claire's photo on the shelf. The glass was dusty, but her eyes in the picture still shone. "You see, Claire," I whispered, "I didn't leave, but they're finding ways to erase me just the same." Outside, the clouds hung low. Rain began to fall again, tapping gently on the roof, each drop marking the slow closing of something that once was whole. Through the window, light spilled down the stairwell, dim, distant, cold as metal. And I knew then, I had been exiled from their lives, not by shouting, but by the softest, most merciless kind of agreement. A house can be taken with a signature, but trust, once lost, never returns. I poured myself a cup of tea. The steam rose, fragile, curling in the fading light. The scent of ginger filled the air, carrying memories of mornings long gone, brewing for Mark, for my husband, for myself. Now it was only me and this old cup, the one thing in this house that still obeyed me. I lifted it to my lips, took a slow sip, and thought, they can change the locks, rewrite the papers, but they'll never know that something else has begun to change. Me. It rained all morning. Not heavy, just steady. The kind of rain that stretches time thin until it clings to your thoughts and won't let go. I sat by the window, watching drops slide down the glass, leaving crooked trails like handwriting someone had tried to erase. On the table lay an old yellowed business card, its edges frayed. Victor Hale, retired judge. I'd kept it for more than 20 years, since the days when my husband was still alive. Back then, Victor was the only one brave enough to stand up for us during a land dispute with the local hospital. He won that case, quietly, without speeches or promises, just saying, "Justice doesn't need applause, only results." Today I needed him again, not for a lawsuit, but for my life. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed. The line rang long and rough before cutting off. I took a breath and tried again. The second time, a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Victor Hale speaking." His tone was the same as I remembered, low, steady, carrying the weariness of someone who's seen too much truth. "Victor, it's me, Helen Moore." A pause, then his voice softened, touched with surprise. "Helen, it's been a long time. How are you?" I pressed my lips together, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I'm not. I've been deceived, and I think I'm about to lose everything." Silence, only the sound of wind, the faint rustle of paper on his desk. "Tell me exactly what's happened." So I did, briefly, but enough for him to understand. Sabrina forging my signature, the bank documents, the loan, the so-called accident on the stairs, and Mark, my own son, believing every word she said. At first, my voice trembled, then it steadied. Maybe when you finally reach the bottom of helplessness, fear dissolves, leaving only the instinct to survive. Victor didn't interrupt. He let me speak until every word was out. When I finished, his tone was quiet but firm. "Helen, do you still have any proof?" "I photographed everything." "Good. Send it to me now, through my old email, not yours." I heard the soft tap of his pen against the desk. Then clearly, each word deliberate. I'll review the documents. Stay silent. Wait for my signal. The line between us went still. No promises, no comfort, just the calm certainty of a gavel striking wood. And somehow that was enough. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. Victor, my voice wavered. If I'm wrong, if I'm just imagining things. You're not imagining, Helen, he said. I've seen too many people think they're safe, until their house no longer bears their name. He paused, his voice lowering. You're right. It's fraud. And this time justice needs to be summoned back. A small smile rose to my lips, the first in days. Outside, the rain had begun to ease. The sky looked newly washed, stripped of its gray. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. Thank you, Victor. I'll wait. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the dark phone screen. It felt like lighting a candle in a room that had been dark for far too long. On the table, the business card still lay there, its corner damp from a drop of tea. I wiped it gently and pressed it between the pages of my journal. Noon light slipped through the clouds, casting a thin, pale beam across the table, the same kind of light Victor once brought into our lives. I drew a slow breath. The house might no longer belong to me, but truth still had a place to return to. The afternoon dragged quietly, gray and suspended between rain and mist. I sat before the computer, opening an old email account I hadn't touched in years. Victor's address was still there in my contacts, a doorway long covered in dust, but never locked. I opened the photo folder, the quick, dim shots I'd taken the day Sabrina walked away from the dining table with those papers. Each one was slightly blurred under the yellow light, but clear enough to show my forged signature on every page.
The handwriting was so precise it chilled me. Even the tilt of the H was identical. I attached every file, my hand trembling slightly. On the screen, the line appeared. To Victor Hale. Subject, evidence, personal. I typed a few short words, a confession more than a message. Victor, these are all I have. I don't know what they'll do next, but I know that if I stay silent, I'll lose everything. Helen. Then I pressed send. The small whoosh sounded soft, but it felt like an exhale of release. The window was still open. Cold air drifted in, carrying the scent of wet earth. Outside, the rain thickened, each drop tapping against the glass, weaving together like the sky was rewriting my story itself. Beyond the mist, the pine-covered hill faded into gray. I pictured Victor somewhere out there, perhaps in his small study lined with old books, sitting at his desk, reading the evidence I had just sent. In my mind, I could see him clearly. Silver hair, stern eyes that held warmth, scanning each line slowly, deliberately, as if it were the most important testimony of his life. His image lived only in memory, and yet, in that moment, his presence felt real, solid, near. I remembered an afternoon long ago when he'd stood at our doorway, case files in hand, telling my husband, "No one loses everything as long as they still believe in the truth." Back then, I'd only smiled, never imagining that one day those words would come back as the rope pulling me from the edge. I closed the laptop and leaned back. Thunder rumbled somewhere far away, fading into the steady rhythm of rain. The house remained silent as ever, but something inside me had shifted. I was no longer the woman locked inside her fear. I was listening, at last, to the faint, patient pulse of hope. On the table, my cup of tea had gone cold, the steam long gone. I lifted it, looking into the shallow swirl of what was left, a thin ring of tea forming a circle, like a seal on a promise. Someone out there might still want me gone. But now I had proof, and one man who believed. A flash of lightning lit the window. reflected on Claire's framed photograph, and for a brief second her face shone with light. "It's all right, sweetheart," I whispered. "I've sent the first thing, and maybe the last thing I still believe in." I sat still, listening to the rain drumming gently against the eaves. Its rhythm was slow, steady, like the heartbeat of something coming back to life. A faint spark of hope flickered to life within me, not bright enough to warm the room, but enough to remind me that even this darkness would, sooner or later, be seen. And somewhere, perhaps miles away, a man had just opened my email and quietly nodded. The sky was unnaturally clear after so many days of rain. Sunlight broke through the pines, scattering across the drops still clinging to their needles, each one glinting like glass. Sabrina opened the car door and stepped out, smiling at me, a smile convincing enough to make anyone believe she was the most devoted daughter-in-law in America. "It's just for a few weeks, Mom," she said, her voice smooth and sweet. "You'll love it here. They have a lavender garden, and every morning someone plays piano for the residents." She was bringing me to Evergreen Senior Home, pretending it was care. The building was painted white, surrounded by drooping willows and gravel paths. From a distance, it looked like a summer retreat, peaceful, scented faintly of soap and antiseptic. But beneath the breeze I could smell something else, the scent of separation. A staff member greeted us at the entrance. Sabrina spoke quickly, as if afraid I might change my mind. "This is my mother-in-law, Mrs. Moore. I booked her a private room, Lakeview. The admission papers are already sent." The woman nodded, smiling professionally. "We've received everything." I stood still, looking up at the wooden sign carved with the words, "Evergreen Senior Home, where care feels like family." Family. The word made me want to laugh. What kind of family sends its mother away like a fragile item needing storage elsewhere? We were led into an office. A neat stack of documents waited on the table. Sabrina pulled out a chair for me, her tone gentle but firm. "Mom, you just need to sign here. Voluntary admission." I frowned. "Voluntary?" "Yes, just to make sure the facility can care for you properly, without all those messy insurance forms." She spoke quickly, glancing toward the staff member as if they were partners in some silent understanding. I picked up the pen. Across the top, bold letters read, "Voluntary Admission Agreement." I read the first line, then the next, phrases hazy as smoke. "The resident agrees to the care, supervision, and management of Evergreen." I stopped at management. Such a simple word. But in Sabrina's world, it meant only one thing: control. Her hand settled on my shoulder, light yet unmistakably firm. "Don't worry, Mom. Just sign. It's all standard." I looked at that hand. Nude polished nails, neat, precise, faultless. Part of me wanted to throw the pen down. The other part was simply tired. And when a person is tired enough, they'll sign anything, just for a moment of peace. I signed. The line wavered, thin and shaking like a thread about to snap. She gathered the papers, smiling faintly. "Good." Everything settled. The sound of the pages sliding into the folder, shh, felt like a lock clicking shut. By late afternoon, Sabrina was ready to leave. She kissed my cheek lightly before stepping toward the car. "I'll come by this weekend, okay? Just rest for now." "Yes," I said quietly. "We'll see if you do." She didn't hear, or pretended not to. The door closed. The tires rolled over gravel, fading into the distance. I stood in the hallway, the white light reflecting off polished tiles. The air smelled of disinfectant and jasmine from a diffuser. Soft footsteps approached. A small woman with neatly tied brown hair stopped in front of me. Her badge read, "Nurse Emily." "Mrs. Moore, right? I'm Emily. I'll be looking after you in Wing C." Her voice was warm, real, The kind of voice that belongs to someone who has seen too much loneliness to fake compassion. I nodded. Have you worked here long? 10 years, she said with a faint smile. I can usually tell who comes here because they want to, and who's here because someone else wanted them to be. I looked at her and smiled weakly. And which one do you think I am? Emily paused, then answered softly. That's one of those answers that doesn't need to be said out loud, Mrs. Moore. In her eyes, I saw it. Something was wrong, and she saw that I knew. For the first time since the fall, I met a gaze that wasn't pretending. It told me that no matter how white and cold this place was, there was still someone here who could hear me, if I dared to speak. Night fell faster than I expected. The hallway lights stretched across the tile floor like cold ribbons of water. Rain began to patter softly against the window. I sat in my new room, spotless to the point of lifelessness. White bed, white walls, white curtains. Only the small phone on the desk still belonged to me. I knew Sabrina would call. She never missed a chance to control the story. And right on time, around 8, the phone buzzed. "Mom," her voice came through, warm, smooth, practiced. "Is everything all right there? Are the staff treating you well?" "Fine," I said. "Good. You need to relax. I told them you tend to forget your medication, so they'll remind you." I let out a thin laugh. "Thank you for reminding them I've lost my mind." A pause, then her soft chuckle. "Oh, Mom, don't misunderstand. I'm just worried. Everything's fine." I let her talk, her words gliding easily, harmless on the surface. Meanwhile, my fingers slid under the desk, quietly switching the phone to record. Her voice came through, crisp and cold. "I just need you to sign a few more papers and the bank will stop bothering us. Then you can live comfortably there, no worries at all." "What papers?" "Just some confirmations. Don't stress. I'll bring them next time I visit." I ended the call. My heart pounded. I had recorded our conversation. Not because I wanted a fight, but because survival leaves you no other choice. I played the recording back once. Her voice was clear, every word sharp-edged, cut clean like glass. When she said, "Don't stress, Mom," I smiled. Not bitterly, not even sad, just the calm smile of someone who's finally seen the truth behind a flawless mask. The next morning, Nurse Emily came in with my medication. I spoke softly. "Can you help me with something?" She looked surprised. "What is it, Mrs. Moore?" I handed her the phone. "There's a recording on here. I need you to send it to this address." I wrote the line carefully, my hand trembling but legible. Victor Hale, 45 Elm Street, Portland. Emily studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I don't need to know the details, but if you trust this person, I'll send it." "I trust him more than anyone I have left." She gave a small, steady smile. "I'll do it during my lunch break." When she left, I watched her small frame move down the hallway in her white uniform. The fluorescent lights glinted off her hair, forming a faint halo, a fragile kind of hope I hadn't dared to believe in. By noon, it rained again. The rain at Evergreen was different, thin, cold, without echo. I sat by the window, my fingers brushing the small scar at my temple where I'd fallen. The quiet hum of the hallway blended with the ticking of the clock, time itself tiptoeing toward the truth. When Emily returned, she simply laid a hand on my shoulder. No words. I understood. The recording had been sent. I turned to the window. The willows outside bowed their heads in the rain. Everything was silent, except the wind and the steady beat of my heart. I spoke softly, each word deliberate. "Let justice hear me." My voice disappeared into the air, mingling with the sound of rain tapping on the glass. I didn't know if Victor would receive it, or if he'd believe me when he did. But for the first time in months, I knew I was doing the right thing. Outside, the rain thickened. Each drop struck the railing and burst into tiny sparks of light, as if the sky itself were blessing a woman who had finally found her voice again. Music drifted from afar, lively, elegant, the kind you'd hear at a wedding under chandeliers and polished glass. Lights curled around the wooden fences, lining the path up the hill. Luxury cars pulled into the driveway one after another, and in the middle of all that brightness, the house on Green Hill glowed as if it had never held a single secret. Sabrina was hosting a launch party for her new firm, Moore & Hart Interior Studio. A bright logo board stood proudly at the steps. The guests were architects, investors, a few of Mark's old friends. Everyone dressed in black and white, crystal glasses in hand, the murmur of polite laughter blending with a soft jazz tune. On the second-floor balcony, the white curtains fluttered in the breeze. From far away, in my small room at the Evergreen Nursing Home, I imagined every sound. Emily had told me the event would be streamed live, so I opened my laptop only to catch a glimpse of the house. That house, my house, now belonged to another world, polished, perfumed, stripped of every trace of the years that once lived inside it. On stage, Sabrina stepped forward, black dress, curled hair, a poised smile. She held the microphone with practiced grace, her voice steady and bright, trained for admiration. Thank you all for being here tonight. Moore & Hart isn't just a company, it's my dream. A dream about space, about family, and about legacy. She paused, smiling as applause filled the air. Below, Mark looked up at her, eyes shining with pride, a glass of wine in hand. I watched it all through the screen, not angry, just distant. The woman speaking on that stage wasn't my daughter-in-law anymore. She was someone else entirely, someone who had erased every mark of where she came from. Then she raised a hand toward the technician. And now, I'd like to share a short video, the story behind Moore & Hart. The large screen behind her flickered to life. The lights dimmed. Only the LED glow bathed the faces in the crowd.
The video began softly, footage of the house being remodeled. Fresh paint, new lighting, the smiling design team. Sabrina's voiceover floated through the speakers. I've always believed that every home carries its own soul. Sometimes, to begin again, we must erase what's been there the longest. Polished, poised, just enough poetry to sound sincere. Then, suddenly, the video froze. Silence. The screen went black. For 2 long seconds, nothing moved, and then another sound broke through. A different recording. Unmistakable. Her voice. Not from the video, but from the conversation we'd had in Evergreen. I just need her to sign and it's done. Then the bank will stop being a problem, and she can rest forever. The words echoed through the hall, cold and precise, slicing through the polished air. Laughter stopped. Glasses froze mid-air. Guests turned to each other, whispering. On stage, Sabrina stood motionless. The microphone slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a sharp, hollow clack. She stared at the audience, her mouth moving soundlessly. Disbelief etched across her face. "Turn it off! Turn it off now!" Her voice cracked, frantic. But the screen didn't go dark. Instead, a pulse of sound waves appeared, rising, falling, and then settling into perfect, damning silence. No one spoke. Mark stood, his face drained of color. He turned toward the technicians. "What is this?" No answer. Only the rain, now heavier, pounded against the roof, the sole sound alive inside a room that had just collapsed.
From my small screen at Evergreen, I watched as Sabrina bent down, staggering, then looked up at the crowd, her eyes red, breath unsteady. And in that instant, I knew. Justice had just found its way back into the house on the hill. The room was frozen. No one knew what to do. The rain outside grew louder, as if the sky itself was holding its breath to listen. Under the glow of artificial lights, everything turned distorted. Faces that had been smiling now stiffened like masks, cracking in silence. Mark stood motionless. He stared at the screen where his wife's voice still echoed. "I just need her to sign and it's done." He'd heard that voice thousands of times, in the mornings, at dinner, in every tender word meant to make him yield. But tonight, it sounded different. Not the gentle warmth of love, the metallic chill of deceit. He whispered, stammering, No, that's not her voice. That can't be real." But when Sabrina turned toward him, her face pale, eyes wide, lips trembling with no sound, he knew. No confirmation was needed. Silence thickened, dense as fog. No gossip, no whisper. Just the stillness of people watching a mask fall and not knowing where to look. Then Sabrina's scream tore through the air, sharp and ragged. "Who did this?" Her hand shot toward the trembling technician by the console. "Who gave you that file?" He shook his head, stammering. I only played the videos from your list. I swear I don't know anything." She yanked the cables. The screen went dark. The noise cut out, leaving the room in dead silence. "This is fake!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "Someone's trying to ruin me! It's fake!" But no one answered. An older woman, one of the bank guests, leaned to whisper to the person beside her. That was her voice. The words were soft, yet they shattered the air. Sabrina turned to Mark. "Mark, I swear that wasn't me. Someone spliced the audio." But he didn't look at her. He just stood there, arms hanging at his sides, eyes empty, fixed on the floor. He was no longer a husband, no longer a protector, just a witness to the cruelest betrayal of his life. From the nursing home, I watched through the small glowing screen. I didn't feel triumph, only the slow, heavy beat of my heart. Because I knew truth, though necessary, always tastes bitter. In that chaos, no one noticed the man standing quietly at the far end of the room.
An older figure in a long brown coat near the bar, the light catching the silver in his hair as it gleamed against the rim of his untouched glass of wine. When the screen went black, he set the glass down and adjusted his collar. No one recognized him. No one remembered him arriving. He walked slowly toward the back door, shoes clicking softly against the wooden floor. Cold wind swept in as the door opened. Rain poured outside, soaking his shoulders, but he didn't stop. Victor Hale left quietly, as if everything had unfolded exactly as it was meant to. No one called after him. No one asked his name. He simply walked away. The man who once stood before courtrooms, who understood better than anyone how to wait for the moment when justice finally speaks. A flash of lightning split the sky, and for an instant his silhouette merged with the storm, then faded, disappearing down the slope of the hill. Behind him, the house still blazed with light, but inside that light had changed. It illuminated only the wreckage and faces with nowhere left to hide. At Evergreen, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to cry. The rest only wanted silence. Justice doesn't come with shouting. It arrives in the moment when everyone finally sees what they've tried so hard to deny. I whispered, not sure if it was to Victor or to myself. Good job, old friend. Outside, the rain kept falling, but for the first time in months, it no longer felt cold. That morning,
Portland lay under a thin veil of fog. The wind moved gently through the willows around the nursing home, carrying the scent of damp earth and jasmine. Then came the sharp screech of brakes outside the gate, urgent, out of place in a world used only to birdsong and the soft wheels of the elderly. The door burst open. Mark rushed in, shirt half-buttoned, shoes streaked with mud, breath unsteady, eyes red. The receptionist startled, trying to stop him, but he spoke quickly, his voice cracking. "Please, my mother, Helen Moore. Which room?" "C12, she answered softly, but he was already gone. His footsteps pounded down the hall, echoing off the walls, each one a heavy beat of regret. Old faces looked up as he passed, then turned away again. No one asked. I heard the door open and looked up. Mark stood there, breathless, wild-eyed. For a moment, I didn't recognize my son. The man in front of me looked hollow, creased shirt, trembling hands, eyes shattered. He started to speak, but no sound came. I met his gaze, my voice quiet but steady. "You see now, silence is also a sin." No need to shout, no need to ask why. The words carried their own weight. Mark froze. His lips trembled, and before he could form another word, tears broke loose. "Mom, He sank to his knees, clutching my frail hands, the same hands he once pulled away from. "Mom, I was wrong." The words burst out like something long trapped in his throat, breaking as they escaped. I looked down. His grip was tight enough to hurt, but I didn't pull away. In his eyes was everything, fear, shame, and something that looked like a lost child finally finding his way back. I exhaled slowly. No tears, just a heaviness in my chest, like an old iron door forced open after too long. "You weren't wrong to love," I said softly, "but you were wrong to let love blind your conscience." He bowed his head, tears falling onto my hand. I know everything now. They sent the video everywhere. Everyone's heard it." "You were right. I let my silence kill you." I said nothing. There were no words fit for comfort, and none fit for punishment. We just stayed there, one kneeling, one sitting, and between us lay the years stolen by misplaced faith. A breeze slipped through the crack of the door, stirring the curtains. Outside, the sky was still gray, but a thin beam of light pierced through the clouds, landing on the floor, right where our hands were joined. I looked at him, and something inside me loosened, quietly. Something that hurt, yet healed in the same breath. Not forgiveness, just exhaustion, the kind that turns anger into stillness. "Lift your head, Mark," I whispered. He did. His eyes were wet, waiting for a verdict. I touched his cheek, the same hand that once shielded the boy he had been, now trembling with age. "Whatever's left, son, learn to protect it." Mark nodded, tears still falling, but in his eyes there was light again, fragile, honest, and, for the first time, unhidden. Outside the door, Nurse Emily passed by. She paused for a moment, watching silently, then gently pulled the door closed, leaving the two of us in a quiet pocket of stillness. I looked down at Mark's hands, still holding mine. Those same hands that once pushed me away were now trembling, clinging, as if afraid I might disappear again. There are mistakes you can't erase, but there are sons who only need to fall once to finally see the sky. I slowly pulled my hand free, not out of coldness, but because I knew that if I kept holding on, neither of us would escape the gravity of pity. Turning toward the window, I spoke softly. "Mistakes aren't what you should fear, son. What's truly frightening is not learning from them." My voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it filled the small room like a gentle sentence passed down from one heart to another. Mark bowed his head. I heard a sound,
A small, breaking gasp. Not loud, not dramatic, just the brittle breath of a man realizing that everything he believed to be true had come undone. Then he began to cry. Not like an adult trying to restrain himself, but like a child. He cried for his mother, for the woman he once loved, and for himself, the man who had stood between two worlds and chosen the wrong one. His sobs blended with the sound of rain against the window, forming a rhythm somewhere between repentance and release. I didn't turn around. I let him cry. Some lessons, I've learned, can only be taught through tears. Outside, I could see Emily through the window, holding an umbrella, guiding an old man carefully along the stone path. Life went on, ordinary, untouched by the storms that lived inside other people's hearts. A small gust of wind slipped in, brushing the curtains, and I thought, perhaps this was the first moment in years that I truly felt light. When Mark's crying quieted, I finally spoke. You don't need to apologize anymore. What I wanted to hear wasn't, I'm sorry. It was, I understand. He nodded, eyes still glistening. I understand now. I really do. And I believed him, at least in that moment, because sometimes it takes a cracked heart to let the light come through. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. Go, Mark. Don't stay here. There are things you need to fix, not for me, but for yourself. He nodded again, rose slowly, like a man stepping out of a long sleep. When the door closed behind him, silence returned. The ticking of the clock filled the space between us that once was love, now only memory. Something inside me closed that day, but something else quietly opened. Across the city, in a high-rise apartment downtown, Sabrina sat before her laptop. On the table beside her, a half-finished glass of wine. Next to it, the morning paper, its headline carved in black. Recording exposes Moore and Hart founder in fraud scandal. She read every word, her hand gripping the edge of the desk. The screen's pale light washed over her face, revealing eyes still sharp, the kind of eyes that don't surrender easily. Her inbox overflowed. Messages from investors, reporters, lawyers, half demanding answers, half cutting ties. Sabrina inhaled slowly, cleared every notification, and opened a hidden folder. Inside were the original contracts, a few private notes, and a single video clip. Mark signing the property transfer papers. Her lips curved into a thin smile, sharp as a blade. You think you've won, Helen? She whispered, voice rough, low. You have no idea what I still have. Beyond the glass wall, the city shimmered in the night, 1,000 lights, each one a secret waiting to be used. She stood, straightened her dress, and dialed a number. David Cooper Law Office, good afternoon, came the receptionist's voice. Sabrina smiled. Tell Mr. Cooper, I'd like to talk business. And somewhere, beneath the calm of understanding and the fragile warmth of reconciliation, another storm began to rise. While I, still sitting in my quiet room at Evergreen, had no idea that the peace I'd found was only the eye of the storm. That afternoon, Portland glowed clear as glass. Soft sunlight poured through the nursing home window, scattering across the tiled floor in quiet patches of gold. I was writing again, fragments of memory stitched into a small notebook, unsure why. Perhaps because writing was the only proof I still existed. Then came a knock, gentle but firm. I thought it was Emily. She usually stopped by around this time, bringing pills and small stories from the world outside. But when the door opened, it wasn't her. A tall figure stood there, wrapped in a dark brown coat. His hair had turned silver, and his face carried more lines than I remembered. But the eyes, steady, alert, unsparing, were the same eyes of a man who'd long ago learned what justice costs. I froze. Victor,
Victor? He smiled, a kind, contained smile. Hello, Helen. I thought you might still remember the old gatekeeper of justice. I tried to rise, but he raised a hand. Stay seated. I'm not here for a visit. I'm here to return what's yours. He placed a bound folder on the table, thick, worn, tied neatly with leather string. My heartbeat quickened. On the cover, stamped in faded ink, property title, 17 Hillview Road, and below it, handwritten, Helen Moore. I opened it slowly. The pages were old but well kept, sealed with the red mark of the city court. Victor spoke, calm, measured, each word landing with the weight of a gavel. The house was never transferred. You are still the legal owner. I looked up, breath caught. You're sure? He nodded. As sure as anything I've ever said in a courtroom. He sat, taking off his glasses. I went through every record. Sabrina only filed forged copies. The originals are still in the county archives. I retrieved certified duplicates myself. You never lost that house, Helen. They just assumed you'd lost the strength to fight. I stared at the file, then back at him. My body felt weak, but inside, something cracked open. Not tears, just the quiet return of belief after a long exile.
You saved me again, Victor. My voice trembled. I wasn't sure if I was speaking to an old friend or to justice itself, finally finding its way back. He shook his head, smiling faintly, almost sadly. No, Helen, I didn't save you. I only helped justice find its way home. I went silent. Outside the window, willow branches trembled in the light breeze. The afternoon sun slanted across his face, tracing the thin scar on his cheek, a relic from a case he once told me about, long ago. I looked at him then, truly looked. The same man who once stood before a courtroom, voice unwavering in the face of money and power, speaking for the truth when no one else dared. Time had slowed him, yes, but it hadn't dimmed the fire in his eyes. I thought it was all over, I said quietly. Victor smiled. No, Helen. It's only time you stood up and reclaimed your name. I nodded, resting my hand on the first page, touching it like one might touch a heartbeat. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. The weight in my chest lifted, light and unfamiliar. He looked at me, voice softening. Justice isn't something we're given, Helen. It's something that waits, for those patient enough to believe in it. I smiled, a real smile, rare and steady. Then I suppose I've been patient long enough. Victor nodded once, a quiet salute. In that small room, washed in late sunlight, I understood. I hadn't been rescued. I had finally been returned to myself. He simply smiled. Not to save you, Helen. Just to set things right. His voice was rough, low, but each word dropped into the still air like a pebble breaking the surface of a quiet lake. I looked up at him, forcing myself not to cry. In his eyes was something ancient, the look of a man who had seen both light and darkness, and chosen to stand at the line between them. Victor opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. I reached out to an old friend, he said. David Cooper. He's with Cooper and Reed now. Sharp, discreet, and still owes me a favor. He placed the envelope on the table and slid it toward me. I'll have him handle the entire case. He'll work with the county registrar and file for reinstatement of your property rights. My fingertips brushed the edge of the envelope. It felt as if I were touching my own life, worn, but still intact. I don't know what to say, I whispered. Don't thank me, he replied. I owed your husband a promise that if you ever found yourself in trouble, I'd stand on the side of the truth. He smiled faintly, a smile that didn't need an audience. I was quiet for a moment before asking, "Do you really believe justice always wins, Victor?" He thought for a moment, then said, "No, but I believe it always finds its way back, right when people start to think it's dead." Outside the window, the rain had stopped. Sunlight slipped through the willow branches, scattering golden flecks across his face. His silver hair caught the light, not bright, but steady, the kind of glow that makes you want to believe again. He buttoned his coat. "I should go," he said. "There are calls to make before anyone realizes I've touched these files." I nodded. "Be careful, Victor." He gave a small laugh. "You know me, Helen. I've never liked noise. I work in silence, but I always get there." At the doorway, he paused and turned back. "Stay steady. You're about to face the loudest part, the moment when truth surfaces, and those who thrived in the dark will try to drag it down again." Then he nodded once, a farewell and a warning. I watched him walk down the hallway, tall, slow, but upright. His footsteps echoed evenly between the soft roll of wheelchairs and the distant chime of nurses' bells. He left the way only he could, like a gatekeeper of justice, silent and deliberate. No one in the home knew what the man in the brown coat had just carried out of that room. Only I understood. Sometimes justice doesn't wear robes, doesn't carry a gavel. It wears an old coat, walks quietly, and speaks very little. When the door closed, the room fell back into stillness. I looked down at the brown envelope on the table, the seal unbroken. Part of me wanted to open it right away. Another part wanted to keep this moment just a little longer. The fragile space between loss and return, between pain and peace. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind outside the window. Something in me began to return. Faith, calm, strength. I thought of Victor, of the way he walked away without looking back, and I understood. Justice, like people, doesn't need applause. It only needs someone to believe it's still there. News travels faster than wind. That morning, Nurse Emily came into my room with a folded newspaper in her hand, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mrs. Moore, have you seen this?" She laid the Portland Tribune on my table. The headline stretched across the front page in bold black letters. "Moore and Hart Studio under investigation for forgery and contract fraud." I stared at those words for a long time, as if they were written in a language I no longer spoke. Sabrina, under investigation for falsifying signatures and fraudulent contracts. 3 weeks ago, she'd stood under stage lights and cameras talking about her creative vision. Now, the photo showed her with her head bowed, shielding her face, walking between 2 officers in black suits. The article read, "Preliminary evidence indicates that Mrs. Sabrina Moore used falsified property documents to obtain bank loans, along with multiple contracts bearing signs of manipulation." I exhaled slowly, not in triumph, not in revenge, just the quiet release that follows the end of a storm. On the television in the common room, the news played again. The anchor's voice was cool and even. Investigators have confirmed that a private audio recording serves as a key piece of evidence in the case. Its source remains undisclosed for security reasons. I smiled faintly, a smile no one saw. Perhaps justice never needed to stand in a courtroom. It only needed to be heard. A few days later, Emily brought another paper, a finance magazine. On the cover was the Moore and Hart office, sealed with yellow tape. Employees carrying boxes out of the glass building. Her company was gone. Her name, ruined. The same magazines that once praised Portland's rising design visionary now rewrote the story. A rise built on deception. A former employee interviewed through tears said she controlled everything. No one dared say no. Looking back, it was all a performance. Online, her features, her interviews, her photos, all vanished. No one remembered her for elegant interiors anymore. They remembered only the woman who sent her mother-in-law to a nursing home to steal her estate. The modern world forgets fast, but when it decides to erase someone, it does it completely. I wasn't happy. I was simply at peace. Truth doesn't have to win. It only needs to return to where it belongs. Mark left his job. He lives alone now. Emily told me he'd quit the construction firm, rented a small apartment on the south side. No one knows what he does. He avoids old colleagues, speaks to almost no one. Each afternoon he goes to a cafe near the river, sits by the window, watches the rain. Once he sent me a short, handwritten letter. Mom, I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I'm learning to be silent in the right moments and to speak when it matters. I won't let the truth be buried again. The handwriting trembled, but the lines were steady. I folded the letter and set it beside my teacup, the same place where I once left my notes for Victor. No long explanations, no promises, just that single line, enough for me to know he had begun again, slowly but honestly. That afternoon, I walked through the nursing home garden. Dry leaves crunched underfoot. The air smelled faintly of late autumn warmth. Above me, thin clouds drifted like pale smoke, unhurried, and I thought, maybe life doesn't need a courtroom to deliver justice. Time knows how to write its own verdict. Sometimes, the greatest punishment is having to live on with everything you've done. When Victor came back to the nursing home with the final stack of documents, he asked me a question I never expected. Do you want to press charges, Helen? Before me lay a thick case file, enough to put Sabrina behind bars for years. Forged deeds, falsified contracts, the original recordings, everything, solid and irrefutable. I turned a few pages, the papers whispering under my fingers. My name appeared again and again, signed in a hand that wasn't mine. I stayed silent for a long time, then set the pen down. No, Victor, I don't want to sue her. The law can punish actions, but it can't teach someone how to be human. He studied me for a moment, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, then nodded, quietly, as if he understood. You've always been different, Helen. Maybe that's why you've had to hurt more than most. I smiled faintly. Pain is how we learn that even trust must have boundaries. He said nothing after that, just rose, gathered the files, and left the room. The door closed behind him, and I knew it was over, at least for me. But outside these walls, the story was only beginning. News spread quickly that I had declined to pursue legal action. Online headlines called me the woman who chose grace over vengeance. Comment sections filled with strangers' opinions, admiration, disbelief, cynicism. Some called me naive. Others wrote, "Forgiveness is the most expensive verdict of all." A young reporter came to the nursing home one afternoon. She carried a small camera, a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, and the kind of brightness only youth can hold. "Mrs. Moore," she began softly, "many people think you should have fought for justice to the end. Why did you stop?" I looked straight into the lens and answered evenly. The law can punish behavior, but it cannot reach the soul. And I refuse to spend the rest of my life trying to prove someone else wrong. The reporter went quiet. Then, almost to herself, she asked,
Do you regret it? I smiled. No, because hatred is a room with no windows, and I've lived in the dark long enough. That night, the interview aired on local television. They cut the background music, leaving only my voice and the soft sound of rain outside the nursing home. The anchor closed the segment with a single line. Some verdicts never need a courtroom because the heaviest sentences are carried in the hearts of those involved. Days later, letters began arriving, dozens of them. Handwritten notes from strangers, each slanted line trembling with honesty. A mother wrote, "I used to resent my daughter-in-law. After hearing you speak, I think it's time I let go." A young man sent another, "Thank you for reminding me that a man isn't strong because he hides his mistakes, but because he faces them." I read each letter carefully, then placed them by the window where sunlight could touch the paper. Maybe that was all the reward I needed, the quiet understanding between people who had once been broken and still chose to heal. That evening, the television station invited me back for a live segment titled Greed and the Limits of Humanity. The host leaned forward and asked, "Mrs. Moore, if you could send one message to anyone choosing profit over family, what would you say?" I lifted my head, met the camera's gaze, no script, no performance, just truth. "Greed doesn't begin with money," I said slowly. "It begins with the absence of respect. Once we stop seeing others as human beings, everything that follows is just consequence." The studio fell silent. No applause, only stillness. But I saw someone in the crew bow their head. The light shone warm on my face. No longer the glow of pain, but something softer, like early morning light after a long storm. And I thought, perhaps justice, in the end, is the moment you no longer need to win. Because when your heart is finally at peace, there's nothing left to reclaim.
That morning, the Portland sky looked strangely clear, the kind of light that arrives slowly, as if afraid to disturb what's already been forgiven. The sun climbed behind a thin veil of mist, turning every drop of dew along the ridge into gold. I stood in what used to be my room, looking at the small suitcase on the bed. Neat, light, enough for someone who no longer wished to carry her past. No one knew I was leaving. No goodbyes, no ceremony. Only a short note left for Nurse Emily. "Thank you for believing me when no one else did." The morning bus rolled out of Portland, crossing the bridge that cut through the fog. The city, my city, shrank in the rearview mirror until it became nothing but a shape inside the mist. I leaned my head against the window, feeling the engine's hum merge with my own heartbeat. Steady, calm, the rhythm of someone who knows she has survived. 3 hours later, the bus stopped near a small lake in northern Oregon. Wooden cabins dotted the shoreline, smoke curling gently from chimneys. The air smelled of pine and early autumn. The water was still as glass, holding the sky in its reflection. I rented a small cedar cabin. One bed, one stove, one desk. Enough for a new life that didn't need much explaining. That first evening, I opened the window and listened. To crickets, to water tapping against stone. And I thought, if there is a heaven, perhaps it sounds like this. The next morning, I walked to the small elementary school nearby. The principal, a gentle woman named Grace, recognized me from the news. "Are you really Mrs. Helen Moore?" she asked. "I used to be," I smiled. "Now, I'm just someone who loves teaching children to write and to breathe a little slower." Grace looked at me for a long moment before saying softly, "We could use someone like you." From then on, each morning, I came to class with a few blank notebooks,
a small pot of tea, and a handful of quiet stories. I taught the children to write their feelings, not correctly, but truthfully. I asked them to sit in silence for 5 minutes before starting, to listen to the sound of their own breathing. One boy raised his hand. "What if I don't know what to write?" I smiled. "Then write that. Write, 'I don't know what to write.' That's where every story begins." At noon I would sit by the lake, sunlight glinting across the surface, and breathe. Not as prayer, not as ritual, just as proof that I was still here. Months passed quietly. Word reached me that a small group in Portland had started a community project to restore my old house, the house on the Green Hill. Victor and Mark's names were on the donation papers. When the renovation finished, they sent me a photograph. The house repainted, soft white, its windows open wide to the sky. A wooden sign by the front gate read, "The Helen Moore Community Center, a place for healing through kindness." I stared at that picture for a long time. The house that once held betrayal now held meaning. No one said it aloud, but I knew. It was Mark's truest apology, and Victor's final gift before retiring quietly down south. I placed the photo beside a small candle. The flame flickered, breathing against the glass, and for a moment it looked as though the house in the picture was alive again. I whispered, "At last, it's found the purpose I once dreamed for it." Outside the window, the lake mirrored a thin crescent moon, and I understood. Leaving isn't always an ending. Sometimes it's how good things find their way back. One morning while I was grading the children's journals by the window, Grace entered with a folded newspaper. "Mrs. Moore," she said, smiling softly, "you should see this." On the front page was a photograph. Me, sitting by the window of my cabin, tea beside me, a small notebook open under my hand. It had been taken from a distance, without my knowing, yet the morning light streaming through the glass made the image look tender, almost serene. Below it, in bold letters, the headline read, "Helen Moore, the woman who survived silence." I read the headline over and over again. Surviving the silence. A phrase both precise and beautiful. Not overcoming, not revenge, just surviving. As if the most precious thing one can do after ruin isn't to win, but simply to keep breathing, to still be able to see the light. The article told my story in full, but unlike the reports before, there was no judgment in its tone, no sensational words. It spoke of the journey of a mother who had once been cast out of her own home, and who then turned her loss into a place of healing for others. No one can take her voice away, it concluded, because her silence was not surrender, but the choice of someone who has learned the value of peace. I folded the newspaper and set it aside, feeling my heart grow lighter, as if someone had just closed a long chapter for me. This afternoon I walked down to the lake. The water lay still, mirroring streaks of pink clouds across the sky. The children had all gone home. Only the wind and the soft rustle of willow branches remained. I smiled, gazing toward the horizon. The sky shifted from orange to violet, then slowly faded into gray. A flock of birds swept past, their dark wings cutting across the last light of day. I sat on the wooden bench, the teacup in my hand still warm. It had been so long since I'd felt such calm, not because the pain was gone, but because it had finally found a place to rest. I thought of Mark, the son learning to live with the truth, of Victor, the man who quietly restored my justice, then vanished like a streak of light at dusk, and of Sabrina, somewhere now, perhaps alone, surrounded by cold walls. I no longer resented anyone. Each of them carries a sentence of their own. As for me, I've chosen peace as the most beautiful punishment for the past. A cool breeze drifted by, carrying the scent of damp wood and jasmine. I closed my eyes and let time pass over my shoulders like a gentle hand. Every storm leaves behind a new sky. I whispered it softly, for no one to hear, a late farewell to the woman I once was, the one who feared, who faltered, who fell, but never truly disappeared. When I opened my eyes, the sunset was gone. Only a thin band of light remained, holding on to the edge of the day. Inside the cabin, a soft yellow lamp flickered on, spilling its glow through the window. It wasn't bright, but it was warm, and I knew, perhaps I had finally reached the place where every journey leads, a quiet enough space to hear my own heart, no longer trembling.
Morning in Portland was soft and damp. Rain fell in a steady, patient rhythm, as if the city had forgotten what sunlight felt like. In a small apartment on the 7th floor, Mark was making coffee. He didn't turn on any music, didn't switch on the TV. He let the sound of rain and the hiss of boiling water fill the silence. A knock on the door. The delivery man stood there, raincoat dripping, holding out a small parcel wrapped in brown paper, stamped from a little town in northern Oregon. In the corner of the envelope, written in familiar cursive, Helen Moore. Mark's hand trembled as he signed. He closed the door, set the parcel on the table, and just stared at it, as if opening it might cause something inside him to collapse again. At last he began to unwrap it, slow and careful, like handling something ancient and fragile. Inside was an old brass key, worn smooth with time, the number 17 faintly engraved along its spine. Beside it, a folded letter, ivory paper faintly scented with chamomile tea. He unfolded it. His eyes caught the first line. "My son, I have forgiven, but I have not forgotten. Forgiven, because I know you could not see, not because I have forgotten what was done." His hands shook. The letters blurred under the dim morning light. "Do not be afraid to look at your mistakes, my dear. They do not define you. They only remind you that you still have the chance to do right." He read slowly, each line like stepping into a cold stream, each step painful but necessary. "The day you left the home, I thought I'd never hear from you again. But when I saw the old house become a place where others come to learn how to listen, I understood. Sometimes redemption isn't about saying sorry. It's about doing something better than before." Mark paused. The room was so still he could hear the beating of his own heart. The coffee had gone cold. Pale light from the window brushed across the page, making his mother's handwriting seem alive, as if her voice was still somewhere in the room. Then came the final line, the one that broke him open. "Some houses can be rebuilt, but trust cannot." This time he didn't try to hold it back. Tears spilled freely, falling onto the letter, smudging the ink until the words seemed to melt into his grief. He bowed his head over the table, his hand gripping the old key. In his mind he saw it, the house on the hill, glowing with warm light, doors open, and his mother standing there with that gentle smile that felt like morning. He could almost hear her voice again. "Come in, sweetheart. It's getting cold." That moment was gone, but the echo of it still pulsed within him, steady as a heartbeat. Mark took a deep breath and looked up. The rain hadn't stopped, but through the gray glass the sky was beginning to brighten, just a little. He slipped the letter back into its envelope, then opened a drawer and took out an old family photo, the three of them on the porch, smiling into the sun. He placed the brass key on top of the picture, a silent promise to himself.
he would never waste the faith his mother had left him. The coffee was completely cold now, but he didn't move. He just sat there, eyes fixed on the window. Outside, the gray light turned silver, glinting off the raindrops that clung to the glass. And in that silence, he whispered, barely audible, but enough to fill the room. I understand now, Mom. This time, I truly do. The next morning, Portland was still soaked in rain. Mark put on a white shirt and the old gray vest he once meant to throw away. But somehow, this morning, it felt like the only thing he should wear. He folded his mother's letter carefully, slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, and stepped out. Wind swept through the tall buildings, carrying the scent of coffee and mist, slowing everything down. He didn't call a cab, didn't drive. He walked, all the way to the newsroom. The building stood tall in the middle of downtown, the same place that had printed the first stories about Sabrina's scandal. Back then, he'd only known how to lower his head and hide, too ashamed to read a single line. But today, he returned, not to defend himself, not to explain, but to apologize to his mother, out loud. Surreptitious recognized him the moment he walked in. Mr. Mark Moore? He nodded, his voice calm but firm. I'd like to say a few words, not about the case, about my mother. They led him into a small recording room. The lights came on, illuminating the face that had once filled the internet, a face that had carried 1,000 comments of blame. But this time, the light fell on someone different, not a man running from guilt, but one who had finally awakened from it. When the camera started rolling, Mark looked straight into the lens. His voice was steady, only catching slightly at the beginning. My name is Mark Moore. I am the son of Helen Moore. I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I let fear decide what was right and what was wrong, and because of that, I lost the one person I should have protected first. He paused, breathing in. The sound of that breath echoed softly through the mic. There are no words big enough to ask for my mother's forgiveness. But I want people to know, the justice she believed in didn't just save her. It saved me. If anyone out there sees themselves in my story, I hope you find the courage to say what must be said before it's too late. For a moment, his eyes softened, as if he could see through the lens, reaching the woman somewhere far away. Mom, I read your letter, and I promise I'll live the rest of my life as a thank you. The camera stopped. The room stayed quiet. No one spoke for a while, until the young reporter whispered, almost to herself, "That's the most honest interview I've ever heard." Mark Find More. The clip aired on the evening news. No effects, no edits. The anchor said only one line before it played. This is not a story about guilt. It's a story about awakening. The reaction spread quickly. People began calling him the awakened son. A major magazine ran the headline, "The Man Who Stayed Silent and Learned the Value of a Voice." Social media overflowed with comments, some forgiving, some still angry, but all agreed on one thing. The look in his eyes during that interview couldn't be faked. Mark scrolled through a few of them, then quietly turned off his phone. He didn't want to be a symbol. To him, those words were just reflections of a mistake already past. Polished, sympathetic, but still the past. That night, he sat in his apartment, his mother's letter lying open before him. The warm light from the lamp fell across the old brass key, still resting on the table like a quiet witness to a soul not yet absolved. He exhaled softly, whispering to himself, "People can call me the awakened son if they want, but for me,
This is only the beginning of redemption. He stood, grabbed his coat, and slipped the key into his pocket. Outside, the rain had started again. Fine, even, steady, like a heartbeat. Mark stepped out and walked toward the train station. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew that every road ahead would lead to the same place his mother had already found. Somewhere quieter, somewhere truer. As the train began to move, he looked down at his phone, a photo of the Helen Moore Community Center glowing in warm light. In the reflection of the train window, he smiled, a small, sincere, deeply human smile. The road up to the Helen Moore Community Center lay quiet beneath a soft veil of fog. The air was silver, thin as silk, the sound of car tires crunching over gravel crisp and distant. Mark turned off the engine and sat for a long moment, watching through the windshield as the white house on the hill appeared, half hidden by the morning mist, just as it had in his memories. He stepped out, slipping one hand into his coat pocket where the old brass key still rested. He didn't need directions. He remembered every wooden step, every small crack in the stone path. By the porch, the wooden sign that read Helen Moore Community Center swayed gently in the wind, its faint creak like a quiet sigh from time itself. Mark stopped at the front door. The fog dampened his hair, soaked through his jacket. A child passed by, holding a music book, and smiled up at him. "Hi, mister. Are you here to visit the center?" He nodded, a tired smile touching his lips. "Yeah, I used to live here." The child's eyes widened. Then she ran inside, calling out in a bright voice, "Miss Grace, someone who knew Mrs. Helen is here." The wooden door opened, and from within came the soft, aching sound of a piano. Lullaby for the Lost. The melody stopped him cold. It was the song his mother used to play on the rare nights when the house still held laughter. The first notes floated like breath, then lingered, tender, haunting, drifting through the hallway, out into the fog. Mark stood frozen. For an instant, he was back 30 years ago. His mother sitting by the piano, hair silver under the lamplight, the faint scent of chamomile tea curling through the air. The memories came rushing in. Dinners, laughter, and the kind of silence that could only exist among people who once loved deeply. He stepped inside. The main hall had been renovated, bright, airy, lined with black and white photographs of the people who had come here. Elderly men meditating, children learning to write, women holding one another in tears. But one frame stood larger than the rest. Helen Moore, seated at her piano, eyes soft, looking somewhere beyond the camera. Below it, a small inscription read, "Healing sound doesn't come from the hands, but from a heart that knows how to listen." Mark stopped before it, his fingers reaching for the glass. Cold. But beneath that coldness, he could almost feel the warmth still living there, something no time could erase. The piano kept playing. The same little girl sat at the bench, her feet not yet touching the ground, striking each key with careful reverence, as if she knew she was carrying something much bigger than herself. Beside her, Miss Grace watched quietly, nodding in rhythm. When the piece ended, Mark clapped softly, just enough for the child to turn around. "You know that song?" she asked, her eyes shining. He nodded, voice low but steady. "My mother wrote it. For those who once lost themselves." The girl tilted her head. "Mrs. Helen was your mom." He smiled, but the tears came before the words could. Not sobbing, just a few quiet drops, the kind that belong to people who've learned how to cry without breaking. He stood there in the open doorway, smiling through the blur. The wind drifted through the house, carrying the scent of wood, tea,
and something achingly familiar, as if his mother was still here, only transformed into air, into sound, into the light falling through the window. Mark looked up toward the ceiling, where the dust and mist floated together in a beam of morning sun. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm home." No one answered, but the piano began again, softly, as though the house itself was responding. He stood there for a long time, in that room full of morning light, surrounded by wood and memory and the faintest trace of chamomile in the air. Then a little girl, maybe 8 years old, walked over, her brown hair tied neatly, a music book in her arms. She looked at the photograph on the wall, then back at him, her voice small and curious. "Mister, who is she?"
Mark crouched slightly, smiling, the sunlight reflected in her clear eyes, the same kind of eyes he once saw in the mirror, before the world grew complicated. He turned to the photo, his voice calm, even.
She's the one who taught me that justice can come from the heart.
The girl frowned thoughtfully. "What's justice?"
It's when you don't let what's right stay silent, he said, even when no one wants to listen.
She nodded slowly, then smiled, a bright, innocent smile. Running back to the piano, she lifted the cover over the keys and sat down, her legs still dangling above the floor. "I want to learn her song," she said. "The Lullaby for the Lost." He was silent for a moment, then nodded. The first few notes rang out, clumsy, sparse, but achingly sincere. Each key fell like a drop of morning dew, brightening the room little by little, warming it in a way words never could. Mark stood still, listening. His gaze drifted toward the open doorway. The fog was lifting, the pale blur of morning thinned and gave way to rolling hills, soft with new grass, and the white shimmer of early light. A breeze passed through, carrying faint laughter from the children meditating in the back garden. He drew in a long breath, felt the cold fill his lungs, but it no longer stung. Something inside him had finally come to rest. No anger, no guilt, only a quiet gratitude, the kind that lingers after waking from a long dream, when warmth still clings to your skin. He looked around the house, the photographs, the notebooks, the piano, the scent of wood, the soft morning light. Everything carried her touch. Not in the way of ghosts or memories, but in the way legacies live, silent, steady, kind. And somewhere, deep within memory, her voice was still there, gentle as breath. "Mark, don't be afraid to begin again. As long as your heart stays honest, you'll never lose your way." He smiled. The words no longer hurt.
They felt close now, like she was standing somewhere nearby, by the window, waiting for him to come home. Outside, the last of the fog dissolved. Morning light spread across the roof, soft silver, not bright, but warm, like a hand resting on his shoulder. He sat down in the chair by the window, listening to the laughter outside, to the wind brushing through the willows. Every sound was gentle, but so real it filled him, not with sorrow, but with peace. He pressed his palms together and whispered in his mind, "Thank you, Mom, for leaving behind not just a house, but the light that showed me how to find my way back." His eyes followed the lake in the distance, still veiled with a trace of mist. In that pale light, everything was soft, calm, untouched by any shadow. And deep within, Mark understood. There is no ending that's truly sad, as long as one has the courage to live what comes next, in peace. I am no longer the forgotten woman in that old house. I am simply a mother who has learned that sometimes the greatest victory isn't reclaiming justice, but keeping your heart from turning to stone. If this story made you think of someone, a mother, a son, or maybe yourself, leave a comment below. Tell me what part of you saw in it. And if you wish to hear more stories about family, forgiveness, and the quiet strength that lives inside silence, subscribe to the channel so we can meet again in the next story I'll tell.